What happens when a prince walks onto a late-night stage thinking he owns the place, only to discover that respect is earned, not inherited? In just 39 seconds of pure tension, one comment would turn an entire interview into a battleground, and what started as a simple conversation would end with security escorting royalty out the door. Bill Maher sat behind his desk that evening, like he always did, ready for another round of real talk with someone who supposedly had something important to say. His guest was Prince Harry, someone who'd spent years telling anyone with a camera that he just wanted privacy while simultaneously doing interview after interview. The audience clapped as Harry walked out, waving like he was greeting his subjects rather than sitting down for an actual conversation. "Thanks for being here," Bill said, gesturing to the chair across from him. Harry sat down, adjusting his jacket with this look on his face, like he was doing Bill a favor just by showing up. "Happy to be here, Bill," he said, but his tone suggested he wasn't happy at all. He sounded like someone forced to attend a dinner party they didn't want to go to. Bill leaned forward, getting right into it the way he always does. "So let's talk about your book. You've been pretty open about your family, your life, all of it. Some people are calling it brave. Others are calling it something else entirely." Harry's jaw tightened just a little bit. You could see it happening in real time. "I think people who criticize me don't understand what it's like to grow up in that environment," he said. "The pressure, the scrutiny, the lack of freedom. I'm just trying to tell my truth." "Your truth," Bill repeated, and there was this edge in his voice that anyone who watches his show would recognize immediately. See, that's interesting, because truth is usually just truth. It doesn't need a possessive pronoun in front of it. The audience made that collective sound, that ooh that happens when someone lands a good point. Harry's face changed. His expression went from mildly annoyed to actually irritated. "With all due respect," Harry said, and everyone knows that when someone starts with those words, respect is the last thing on their mind. You don't know what it's like to have your entire life dissected by the media. Bill laughed. Actually laughed. And it wasn't a friendly laugh. "I've been doing this show for years. I've had death threats, protests, people calling for me to be canceled every other week. But sure, tell me how hard it is to live in a palace." "That's not fair," Harry shot back. His voice was getting louder now. The easygoing prince persona was cracking. "You chose this life. I was born into mine." "And you chose to stay in it," Bill countered. "You chose to take the titles, the money, the security, all while complaining about how terrible it all is. You can't have it both ways." Harry leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms like a kid who'd just been told no for the first time. "This is exactly what I'm talking about. This is the kind of treatment that made me want to leave in the first place." Bill wasn't backing down. "Look, I get it. Your life hasn't been easy. Losing your mom the way you did, that's terrible. Nobody's disputing that. But you're sitting here in your expensive suit, after flying here probably on a private jet, telling regular people who are struggling to pay rent that you're the real victim. Do you hear how that sounds?" The audience started clapping, and that seemed to really get under Harry's skin. His face flushed red. "You're twisting my words," Harry said. "I'm literally repeating what you've been saying in every interview for the past few years," Bill replied. "You want sympathy, but you also want to keep all the perks. You want privacy, but you write a book about your private life. You want to be seen as normal, but you remind everyone you're a prince every chance you get." Harry uncrossed his arms and leaned forward, pointing his finger at Bill. "You know what your problem is? You're just another cynic who tears people down because it makes you feel important." The audience went quiet. That silence that happens when someone crosses a line. Bill's expression changed too. The humor was gone. "My problem?" Bill said slowly. "Let's talk about problems. My problem isn't that I was born into wealth and privilege and then spent years complaining about it to make money. That's your problem." "This is ridiculous," Harry said, shaking his head. I came here to have a real conversation, not to be attacked. Oh, this is a real conversation, Bill said. Maybe the first real one you've had in a while. See, everyone else treats you with kid gloves because of who you are. I'm treating you like I'd treat anyone else who sits in that chair. If you can't handle that, that's on you. Harry stood up suddenly, his chair scraping against the floor. I don't have to sit here and listen to this. Actually, you do, Bill said, still sitting, completely calm. You agreed to come on this show. You wanted the platform. Well, this is the platform. We ask tough questions here. Tough questions? Harry's voice was getting shrill now. You're not asking questions. You're just being rude. Bill stood up too, matching Harry's energy. I'm being honest. There's a difference. You've spent so much time surrounded by yes men and people who bow to you that you've forgotten what honest conversation looks like. That's it, Harry said, yanking the microphone off his collar. The wire pulled against the sound equipment, making this loud scratching noise. I'm done. Of course you are, Bill said. When things get uncomfortable, you run. It's kind of your signature move, isn't it? Harry threw the microphone onto the chair. It bounced once and fell onto the floor with a thud. You're a bitter old man who makes a living insulting people. That's all you are. The audience gasped. Actually gasped. You could feel the whole room shift. Bill's face went hard. Get off my stage. Gladly, Harry snapped. No, I mean it, Bill said, his voice sharp and clear. You don't get to come on my show, insult me, and then storm off like you're taking some moral high ground. Security! 2 security guards appeared from the side of the stage like they'd been waiting for this exact moment. Maybe they had been. They walked toward Harry with purpose. Are you serious right now? Harry said, looking at the guards, then at Bill, then back at the guards. Completely serious, Bill said. You want to act like a child? You get treated like one. Escort him out. Harry's mouth fell open. He looked genuinely shocked, like he couldn't believe this was actually happening to him. You can't do this. I absolutely can, Bill said. This is my show, my stage, and I'm done with entitled guests who think they can show up, get their publicity, and then throw a tantrum when they don't like the questions. One of the security guards touched Harry's elbow gently, trying to guide him toward the exit. Harry jerked his arm away. Don't touch me, he said. Sir, we need you to leave, the guard said, professional and firm. Harry looked out at the audience like he was expecting them to come to his rescue, to stand up and defend him, but they just sat there, watching. Some of them were even smiling. This is unbelievable, Harry muttered. What's unbelievable? Bill called out as Harry started walking toward the exit with the guards on either side of him. Is that you thought you could come here and not face any pushback. That's what's unbelievable. Harry turned around one last time, his face twisted in anger. You know what, Bill? You're everything that's wrong with media today. You don't care about the truth. You just care about being provocative. Bill picked up his coffee mug from the desk, took a sip, completely unbothered. And you're everything that's wrong with celebrity culture. You want all the benefits and none of the accountability. Now get out of my studio. Harry pointed at him, his hand shaking slightly. You're going to regret this. I doubt that, Bill said. But you probably will when you realize that walking off a show because someone challenged you isn't the power move you think it is. The security guards were more insistent now, actually placing their hands on Harry's arms and physically guiding him toward the exit. He didn't resist this time, but he kept talking. I've done hundreds of interviews, Harry said, his voice echoing slightly as he got further from the microphones. And you are by far the most disrespectful host I've ever encountered. I'll take that as a compliment, Bill shouted back. It means I'm doing my job. Harry disappeared behind the curtain, the guards on either side of him. You could hear his voice still, muffled now, saying something that nobody could quite make out. Then the stage door slammed shut, and there was this moment of absolute silence. Bill stood there at his desk, looking at the audience. The audience looked back at him. Then someone started clapping. Then someone else joined in. Then the whole room erupted into applause. People standing up, cheering, whistling. Bill held up his hand, quieting them down. "Well," he said, sitting back down, straightening his papers like nothing unusual had just happened. "That went about as well as expected." The audience laughed, that release of tension kind of laugh. "You know," Bill continued, settling into his chair, "when we booked this guest, I thought maybe, just maybe, we'd have an actual conversation. I thought maybe he'd grown up a little bit, developed some self-awareness. But no. Instead, we got a masterclass in how not to handle criticism." Someone in the audience yelled out, "Tell it like it is." "Bill!" And more people cheered. "Here's the thing," Bill said, leaning toward the camera, talking directly to the viewers at home now. "I don't care if you're a prince, a president, or a plumber. If you come on this show, you're going to get asked real questions. And if you can't handle that, if your ego is so fragile that a little pushback sends you running for the exits, then maybe you shouldn't be doing interviews in the first place." The audience clapped again, and Bill let them this time. "I mean, did you see that?" Bill asked, gesturing to where Harry had been sitting. "The second things got real, the second someone didn't treat him like royalty, he fell apart. And then he tried to make me the bad guy for not coddling him. That's what happens when you spend your whole life being told you're special. You forget that special doesn't mean exempt from basic accountability." More applause, louder this time. "And the thing is," Bill went on, "he came here voluntarily. Nobody forced him. He wanted to promote his perspective, tell his side of things. Fine, great. But telling your side doesn't mean everyone has to agree with you. It doesn't mean you get to avoid tough questions or different opinions. That's not how conversations work. That's not how the real world works." A woman in the front row stood up and cheered, and Bill pointed at her with a smile. "Thank you," he said. "At least someone gets it." Bill shuffled his papers again, glancing at his notes. "You know what the worst part is? The worst part is that he probably genuinely thinks he's the victim in all of this. He's going to leave here, call his people, or tell them how terrible I was, how unfair the whole thing was. He'll spin this into another chapter of his persecution narrative, because that's what he does. Everything that happens to him, no matter what, gets filtered through this lens of poor me. Everyone's against me." The audience was quieter now, listening, nodding along. "But here's what really happened," Bill said, his voice serious now. "A grown man came on a talk show, got asked legitimate questions about his very public contradictions, couldn't handle it, threw a fit, and walked off. That's it. That's the whole story. There's no conspiracy, no vendetta, no deeper meaning. Just a guy who can't take what he dishes out." Someone shouted, "Preach," from the back of the audience. Bill smiled. "I will. Because somebody has to say this stuff. Somebody has to call out the hypocrisy, even when it's uncomfortable, even when the person you're calling out has a fancy title and a built-in fan base that's going to come after you on social media." He paused, taking another sip of his coffee. "And let me be clear," Bill continued, "I don't dislike the guy. I don't know him personally. Maybe in different circumstances, we'd get along fine. But what I do dislike is this culture of victimhood mixed with privilege. This idea that you can have everything, complain about having everything, and then get upset when someone points out the absurdity of that position." The audience was completely locked in now, hanging on every word. Bill leaned back in his chair, getting more comfortable, more settled into his rhythm. "You want to know what the real issue is here? The real issue is that he's been living in a bubble for so long that he genuinely doesn't understand how his complaints sound to regular people. When you tell someone who's working 2 jobs just to keep the lights on that your biggest problem is that your family doesn't understand you, what response do you expect?" A man in the third row nodded enthusiastically, and others around him did the same. I mean, think about it, Bill went on. Most people deal with family drama without writing a best-selling book about it. Most people navigate difficult relationships without going on international television tours. Most people figure out how to set boundaries without completely burning bridges and then wondering why everyone's upset with them. The audience laughed at that, a genuine, knowing laugh. And here's another thing, Bill said, Sarah warming up even more. He keeps talking about authenticity, about being real, about showing his true self. But what's authentic about doing calculated interviews where you know exactly what you're going to say, where you've practiced your talking points, where you've got a whole team managing your message? That's not authentic. That's public relations. More applause. Building now. Authentic is what we just saw, Bill said. When someone gets challenged and they react without a script, without a plan, when their real personality comes through because they're not hiding behind carefully crafted responses. And you know what we learned? We learned that when things don't go his way, he runs. That's the authentic truth. Someone whistled sharply from the upper section, and Bill pointed in that direction. Exactly, he said. Because real life doesn't come with an edit button. Real conversations don't let you control the narrative. And real people, the ones he claims to want to connect with, they see through the performance. Bill picked up a pen from his desk, clicked it a few times, thinking, you know what I wanted to ask him before he stormed off? I wanted to ask him about responsibility, not to his family, not to the institution he was born into, but to the people who look up to him. Because whether he likes it or not, he has influence. He has a platform. And when you use that platform to constantly position yourself as a victim while living a life most people can only dream of, what message does that send? The audience went quiet, considering this. It sends the message that no amount of privilege is ever enough, Bill answered his own question. That you can have wealth, fame, opportunities, security, and still find reasons to feel sorry for yourself. And maybe that's true. Maybe money doesn't buy happiness, but it sure does buy a lot of comfort while you're being unhappy. Laughter rippled through the room again. I'm not saying his feelings aren't valid, Bill clarified. Everyone's entitled to their feelings, but there's a difference between having feelings and making those feelings everyone else's problem. There's a difference between seeking support and seeking endless validation for choices that hurt other people. A woman near the front called out, "That's the truth." Bill smiled at her. It is the truth, and that's all I was trying to get him to see. Not to attack him, not to humiliate him, but to maybe, just maybe, get him to look at things from a perspective other than his own. But he couldn't do it, or wouldn't do it. I'm not sure which is worse. He set the pen down, folded his hands on the desk. What we witnessed tonight, Bill said slowly, deliberately, was someone confronting the gap between how they see themselves and how others see them. And that gap, that disconnect, it was too much. Rather than sit with that discomfort, rather than engage with it, he chose to leave. And look, that's his right. But it's also revealing. The audience was completely silent now, absorbing every word. Because if you can't handle 1 hour of tough questions from a talk show host, how are you handling the actual challenges in your life? If this is what makes you fall apart, what happens when something truly difficult comes along? Bill paused. Let that question hang in the air. Maybe that's unfair, he continued. Maybe I'm being too harsh, but I don't think so. I think we've gotten so used to treating certain people with kid gloves that we've forgotten what accountability looks like. We've forgotten that caring about someone sometimes means being honest with them, even when that honesty stings. He said I was being rude, Bill went on. And maybe I was. Maybe my tone was harsh. But you know what? Sometimes the truth is harsh. Sometimes honesty doesn't come wrapped in a nice little bow with a gentle voice and a sympathetic head tilt. Sometimes it's blunt and direct and uncomfortable. And if you're putting yourself out there, if you're writing books and doing interviews and making yourself a public figure, you have to be able to handle that. More applause rippled through the crowd. I've been called worse than rude, Bill said with a laugh. Trust me. And I don't storm off set every time someone disagrees with me or challenges my perspective. You know why? Because I'm an adult. Because I understand that my opinions aren't facts, and that other people are allowed to see things differently. He looked directly into the camera again. So, to anyone watching who thinks I was too hard on him, I hear you. I respect your opinion. We can disagree, but I'm not going to apologize for doing my job, which is to ask questions that other people might be too polite or too scared to ask. That's literally what I'm here for. The audience gave him a standing ovation this time, and Bill stood up too, taking a small bow. We've got to go to commercial, he said, but when we come back, we'll talk to someone who actually knows how to have a conversation without running away. Stick around. The cameras cut, the lights dimmed slightly, and Bill sat back down at his desk. A production assistant hurried over with a fresh cup of coffee and some new notes. Bill took the coffee, sipped it, and looked at the papers without really reading them. The stage manager approached him. That was intense, she said quietly. Bill shrugged. It was honest. That's all it was. Do you think he'll really make a big deal about this? She asked. Probably, Bill said. But that's his choice. I'm not losing sleep over it. The audience was buzzing with conversation, everyone talking at once, replaying what they'd just witnessed. Some people were on their phones, probably already posting about it, sharing clips, texting their friends. That's how these things go in real time now. Every moment captured, dissected, shared before the show even ends. Bill glanced at the empty chair where Harry had been sitting. The microphone was still on the floor where it had fallen. A crew member picked it up, checked it for damage, wound the cable back up. 30 seconds, the stage manager called out. Bill straightened his jacket, ran a hand through his hair, took one more sip of coffee. The audience settled back into their seats. The lights came up. The cameras went live. And we're back, Bill said, smooth as ever, like the last segment had been completely normal. Joining me now is someone who actually understands how interviews work. The show continued, moving forward. The drama of what had just happened already becoming part of the show's history. But in that moment, in those minutes when everything had fallen apart, when a prince had been escorted off a stage by security because he couldn't handle being questioned, something real had happened. Something that people would talk about for days, weeks, maybe longer. Not because it was planned or staged or designed for viral moments, but because it was authentic. Because two people had fundamentally disagreed, and one of them hadn't been able to handle it, and the other one hadn't been willing to back down. Bill kept hosting, kept asking questions, kept pushing back when his next guest said something he disagreed with. But this time, the guest laughed it off, engaged with it, turned it into an actual discussion instead of a confrontation. That's the difference, really. Some people can handle the heat. They can sit in the discomfort, defend their positions, agree to disagree, and move on. Others can't. Others need everyone to agree with them, to validate them, to treat them like they're above criticism. And when they don't get that, when someone refuses to play along, they leave. They storm off. They blame the host, the questions, the format, anything except their own inability to engage with perspectives that challenge their own. The audience seemed to understand that. You could feel it in the room, this collective recognition that what they'd witnessed wasn't just drama for drama's sake. It was something more fundamental. A clash between someone who wanted real conversation and someone who wanted an echo chamber. Bill wrapped up the show like he always did, with a final thought, a joke, a wave to the camera. The audience applauded. The lights went down. Another episode done. But this one would be different. This one would be remembered. Not because a prince had appeared on the show, but because a prince had left it, unable to handle what millions of regular people handle every day, at work, at home, in their relationships. Disagreement, challenge, the possibility that they might be wrong. And in walking away, in making that choice to leave rather than engage, he'd proven Bill's entire point better than any argument could have. That beneath all the talk of wanting dialogue and being open and sharing his truth, there was someone who couldn't actually handle dialogue at all. Someone who wanted a monologue, not a conversation. The crew started breaking down the set. The audience filed out. I still talking, still processing. Bill headed to his dressing room, probably to decompress, to prepare for the inevitable fallout, to get ready for whatever came next. Because something would come next. It always does. Statements from representatives. Social media reactions. Think pieces about who was right and who was wrong. The endless cycle of modern discourse, where every interaction becomes content, every disagreement becomes a battle, and every moment gets replayed until it loses all meaning. But for now, in this moment, the story was simple. A host asked tough questions. A guest couldn't handle them. Security got involved. And everyone watching got to see what happens when privilege meets accountability and flinches. That's the story. That's what happened. Everything else is just noise.